What's up, friends? So today we're going to be checking out a brand new film from the legendary director James Wan. So James Wan has made movies like Conjuring, Annabelle, movies that really are pinnacles of horror, movies that are staples for any night where you just want to get scared. They're solid movies, and I always thought James Wan to be a pretty solid director. The Conjuring series is one of the best horror series out there, 100% guarantee. And those are fantastic testaments to James Wan's ability. So with that being said, I thought this movie would be something quite different. Today we're going to be checking out Malignant. So Malignant is a brand new James Wan film. Came out in 2021. It's currently out on HBO Max, but it might disappear soon. It's also out in theaters. Malignant is a horror, thriller, mystery type film that has a runtime of about an hour and 51 minutes. And essentially the plot centers around this woman who has a unique and mysterious past. And essentially this woman starts to get haunted by this entity and these visions, these so-called dreams that then start to become reality. And essentially this mystery unfolds where this woman's trying to figure out what's happening to her. Investigators are involved trying to figure out what's going on with this whole situation. And there's an entity out there that's causing quite some damage. So starting off with if it's engaging or not, this movie's a little bit of a miss. And I'll explain. So the mystery itself is interesting. When you first see what's happening, when you first get a sense as to the situation that this woman and the people around her are in, you're interested because, it's pretty horrific and some pretty bad things are happening. As the film drags on, however, you start to lose interest pretty quickly. And it's pretty obvious why. One, the main reason for why it gets so old pretty quickly is because it's pretty much a rinse and repeat film. So the plot is very straightforward in terms of you're just trying to figure out what is happening, what is this entity, why is it haunting this woman, why is it doing the things it's doing. The problem becomes when the plot essentially becomes a rinse and repeat of this entity causing damage, the people trying to figure out why it targeted this person, then it goes on to cause more damage, then the people try to figure out why it causes that. And throughout the whole film, there's a whole middle section part where there's no new information revealed. There's nothing new that happens. You don't really have a sense as to what is going on. You don't have a sense as to what is causing this creature. What is this creature? You don't have a sense as to what its tie is to the woman. So you're very detached from the whole situation. You're just watching this go down. You have no idea what's happening. So prepare to be confused quite often, right? And there's a lot of filmgoers out there that hate that feeling of complete confusion as to what is going on, the complete confusion as to what is the reasoning behind any of these actions, what is happening, what is the backstory, any of that, right? None of that is offered to you till the very end of this film. So because of that, it's very easy to lose interest halfway through because you're just gonna start thinking, why am I here? Why do I care? And that's the unfortunate part about Malignant. I like to describe engagement of this film as a bell curve, but a bell curve that's skewed far right. And what I mean by that is, it starts out, you get interested, you kind of get interested. Unfortunately, the majority of the film is where you're still kind of getting interested. And then at the end, once you kind of start to figure out what's going down, you get a little bit more clues as to what might be the cause, that's when it gets interesting again. And then it's a bell curve, it goes up again. Once you figure out what it is, the film gets dull again as it then starts to rely on kind of a shock factor and just extreme violence to essentially provide scares, but also just to progress the plot. And that's when I would say it would drop down again. Because to me, the mystery was the only part about this film that was engaging. Throughout the entire time, you never really feel like you want to connect to the characters. You never really feel like you care about what's happening to all the characters. You never really feel like you connect with the world or this universe or anything. All you want to do is essentially figure out what exactly this thing is. And it's all pure curiosity. There's not clues for you to gather, for you to learn more about this creature or entity or whatever, so you can piece it together yourself. No, it's pure, you're in the dark all the way until the end, until it's explained to you. Then you figure out what it is, and then you lose interest in the film again, because once you know what it is, you're just watching it do things, and it's not the most engaging. Beyond that, the film really relies on a lot of jump scare and, creature in the dark type filmography. Things that have been done in films many times in the past, things that just don't necessarily work out all the time, things that aren't that engaging, especially when it's clear to see when something's going down. It's clear to see when things are gonna pop out. It's just not as effective. You know, it kind of reminds me of The Nun, or films where they just overuse jump scares and they overuse the, you know, creature hidden in the dark type archetype. In addition to that, the film has quite a few plot holes. This film feels a little bit messy, and that's the unfortunate part because it's James Wan, you know, it's someone who you would have expected better from, I guess. Moving on to the characters, you're not gonna care about anyone, unfortunately. At least I didn't. The reasoning is because, one, there's really no character development. You learn a little bit more about the main character as the film progresses. Most of what you learn about the main character and the backstory is near the end of the film. But throughout the entire front part, you never really get a sense as to who the main character is. She's very bland in terms of how she reacts to situations. She doesn't have a sense of humor or any sort of personality that's discernible. She's traumatized from what's happening, and the way she reacts is fine. But when you have a film that hinges on the main character being engaging, a film that focuses so much of its time on the main character and the situation she's going through, I would expect her to be a little better developed. In addition to that, all the side characters are just as plain too. I mean, even the investigator is very straightforward, and you never really get a sense as to who he is or what his situation is. He serves solely as an investigator. Every character is very one-dimensional. They have a purpose, and they serve that purpose. There is no unique, cool insights to help you draw yourself into different characters. You're not gonna like a character over another. You're just gonna not care for any of them throughout the entire film, which is really unfortunate. In addition to that, the acting really doesn't help their case. It's pretty poor, and you can tell that these actors are not necessarily phoning it in. It's not as bad as some other films like He's All That or so on and so forth. It is still pretty see-through, and it's pretty obvious to tell that these characters are kind of phoning it in, don't really believe in the situation. They aren't sold on their characters. And that just further helps to draw you out of the situation and not really care about the characters, the world, what's going down. All you're interested in figuring out what exactly is this thing. And that's just not enough to keep you engaged all the way till the end. Additionally, characters act irrationally so many times. Characters may take actions that wouldn't necessarily go down like that in real life. There's really no reasoning to anything in this film, and because of that, it really helps further pull you out of the situation and further feel like these characters are robots. You don't get that personal connection that you kind of need for a horror movie that's dependent on you caring about the main character. In terms of what's unique about this film, I mean, there's really not much. I will give the film credit for one thing, and that's that it is relatively unique. I mean, the premise as to what exactly this thing is, how it developed, and you know, its background and so on and so forth is very engaging. When you're learning about it for that brief, maybe 20-minute period when you finally get to learn the backstory of the main character, you finally get to learn about what this entity is, you finally get to learn all the clues, that part is highly engaging. I guarantee your eyes will be glued to the screen during that part. Unfortunately, that appears way too late in the film, and it's way too short. For an hour and 51 minutes, to have only 20 minutes be very engaging, just doesn't cut it. The CGI also is just not very great. It kind of reminds me of old-time films where, you know, they just had to make do with what they had. I don't know what the exact budget for this film is. I just know that they could have used it better. It's still enough to where it'll sell, you know, with the scenes, but mainly it's in the violence department that the CGI just lets down. Now mind you, some of the violence is cool, and I mean there's some scenes near the end, especially specifically two scenes in particular, that kind of remind me of, if you guys remember Kingsman, one of my favorite scenes in Kingsman is this scene in a church where one of the agents essentially goes up against a church of people who have been essentially mind controlled to become extremely violent, and he just goes to town on them. And that scene was one of my favorites. It's highly engaging, extremely well choreographed. Don't expect that level here, but there is some really cool choreography and some action scenes, especially near the end, that are pretty engaging and are kind of cool to see this entity or whatever just go to town on people. All in all, I would give this film a 2 out of 4. Low-key, you know, if you're looking for a horror film, this might not be it. I would only recommend watching this film if you really have nothing else to watch, if you're really looking for a horror film to maybe laugh at, or a horror film to just put on in the background and while you're working on something. This film definitely isn't worth going to theaters for. All in all, I hope James Wan can bounce back from this and produce another fantastic film, maybe a Conjuring 3. Maybe. Nevertheless, let me know in the comments below if you have checked out Malignant, if you liked it or not. As always, smash the like button and subscribe if you like this type of content. And now we'll be moving on to the Parents Guide. So Malignant is rated R, primarily for violence, and there's quite a lot of it. In terms of violence, I rated this film a 5 out of 5. There is extremely brutal, graphic, visceral violence. And it's throughout the entire film. As more people fall victim to this entity and as more things go down, the violence just ramps up. And each scene, I feel like James Wan is pushing the boundary as to how violent he could make it, until the very end when he just blew it out of the water and just made it as violent as possible. This film is definitely not for people who dislike violence. You really need to have a penchant for and or be fine with violence to like this film. In terms of sexual content, there's 0 whatsoever. So I gave this film a 0 out of 5. There literally is no sexual content. Finally, in terms of language, I gave this film a 4 out of 5. There is around 10 to 15 uses of the F word. There's D words and S words. It's not too pervasive. It is there, however, and as this is an R-rated film, it's expected. Again, as I mentioned before, it's not too pervasive, and if you can handle a little bit of language, you should be fine. I think really the focus of this film is the violence. You really need to be able to handle a high volume of violence and visceral violence to like this film. But if that's your forte, this might be the film for you. Although again, as I mentioned before, I would not expect too much out of this film. And I honestly wouldn't even recommend it unless you really have nothing else to do. All in all, let me know in the comments below if you do check out this film and what you think about it. Until next time, I'll catch y'all later.